Nice to meet you, everyone. My name is Sebastián. This will be a talk called Blazor, straight to the meat. Just trying to give a very concise introduction to Blazor. I've seen many tutorials around. There's a lot of material online, actually, and I have put some links in the last slide of this presentation. So for anybody who's looking for a more detailed tutorial with more technical explanations, etc., you can go from there. But in this case, I'm trying to focus in a few things which are well, let me put it like this. One of the topics that I wanted to include was authorization and token management, as well as how to deploy a Blazor application as a PWA, but those didn't make the cut. Instead, I'm trying to focus into how to get started with Blazor and some of the pitfalls that you may find along the way, as well as how to avoid them. So the name Straight to the Meat is in part a small vengeance, because even though I'm doing this in English, my mother tongue is Spanish. So just a few small words in Spanish. La idea original era que se llame Blazor a los bifes, pero bueno, es lo que hay. So there we go. We're starting with an intro, and that's me. My name is Sebastián Vansteenkiste. You can just call me Seba. You don't need to try and pronounce my last name. I'm being a professional software developer for the past 10 years. I have been here at Kopius for the past year, working in a big client. I am a 2-year-old dad, and I am a Japanese fencing enthusiast. That's Kendo and Yairo. And that is my little junior developer up there. That's just a picture that I really like. You know, I'm one of those people that you get one good picture, so I put it all over the place. So that's even on my LinkedIn nowadays. Anyway, so what is Blazor? Blazor is a framework. It's a .NET framework which is used to create web applications. Why is it called Blazor? Well, it's hard to tell, really, but you can at least know that the syntax that is used for this file is called Razor syntax, and you will see a little bit more about that in a minute. And I'm guessing at some point somebody said this framework is good for doing blazing fast applications, so they should. Nah, it's actually because of browser. That's where the B comes from. So they joined browser and Razor, and they got Blazor somehow. Why do we use Blazor? Well, there are a number of ideas here. The main thing is that, you know, there's been, if you follow the front end UI landscape, you have noticed that there has been an explosion in the past years, or the past decade maybe, on frameworks and libraries that you can use for creating web applications. And they mostly rely on JavaScript. There's some Java and other technologies going around, of course, but somebody at some point say, hey, why don't we just use .NET for everything? And of course, we may remember other experiments like, I don't know, Silverlight, but unlike those, Blazor just works straight out of the box on any web browser, with a couple of caveats, but we get into that later. So basically, yeah, the strongest feature of Blazor is being able to leverage the whole .NET ecosystem. So if you have, for example, a WinForms application that's legacy, you have been maintaining it for a long time, and you say, hey, maybe it's time to migrate this to the web for some reason, then you don't need to hire a bunch of JavaScript developers. You can just maintain your current team, and well, they still need to learn proper HTML and proper CSS and whatnot, but having your backend in .NET as well as your frontend made in .NET, so it runs in the web, can really speed up the development times and the ramp up. Before I continue, just a small thing. I have prepared, there should be space left over at the end of this talk for Q&As. But if anybody wants to jump in with a question, please just do so. I will try to keep an eye to the chat, but if you want to just raise your hand, I think there's a button for that still in Zoom, or just unmute yourself and reach out. And so I'm not alone talking for an hour. That would be great. So moving on. Speaking of frameworks, we can do a small and quick comparison between Blazor and other kind of the top 3 JS frameworks going around right now, as far as I know, which are React.js, AngularJS, and Vue.js. But I don't want to linger a lot here. They all have their pros and cons, as we know. But mainly this still boils down to, okay, what's the biggest attractive feature from Blazor? And it is doing the .NET, your whole project in .NET. Being frankly, that is the biggest selling point. As well as for performance, there are a few things to consider, which we will see in a future slide. But yeah, let's not linger a lot of this slide. Anyway, so Blazor hunting model. We can't do up to .NET 7. There's just 3 main ways we can use Blazor. One is for doing WebAssembly applications, where the idea is that we program all of our components and our whole UI in .NET, and then this gets compiled into WebAssembly and gets served to the clients when they enter our site. This has a nice advantage, and is that it can run on any browser that supports WebAssembly. It has the largest downside is that this can be kind of a large download for somebody being with a mobile connection with not a lot of bandwidth, maybe. Let's say for a Hello World, you need to get all of the .NET assemblies, so that's about 25 megabytes, which is not a lot by modern standards, but hey, it is a little bit of weight. We are always in the web, we are always racing to try and get our download sites to be as small as possible, so that is a problem usually. But assuming we have nice connections, that's a good route. We then have server-side Blazor, which is pretty much the same, except that instead of compiling our application and serving it as WebAssembly, every time a new user connects to our web page, this creates a session on the server, and the only thing that gets downloaded are some very, very small Signal R assemblies, and I think a web worker. And so that renders our page in the browser, but every interaction we have with the page goes to the server and back, and then we see changes reflected. So we have the advantage that it only requires a very small download size, but if we have a very slow internet connection, as in regards to delay, maybe we are very far from where the server is in the world, that can get into a kind of not responsive UI, where you click and you may see a small delay before things happen, which is frankly annoying. Then there is what is also called a hybrid model, which is not really a good name for it because it actually pertains to MAUI. And the idea here is that we can make a Xamarin application where instead of using XAML for defining our UI like we do on Xamarin Forms, we can just do it with Blazor. then it gets compiled into a native-ish application. So it's actually a web view, which is rendering our UI, but it should look and feel like a native application. You can style it however you want, like in a web page. So if you have tried to get into Xamarin or Maui before, but you found XAML and Xamarin Forms to be a little bit challenging because it's got that syntax that it's a little bit weird. I mean, if you already come from what was it, WPF, I think, that started using that kind of syntax, and you are already familiar with it, then you're fine with Xamarin and Maui. But if you are having issues and still want to give that technology a try to develop mobile applications, then know that Blazor is also an alternative. Now, starting .NET 8, there's also what should be called a hybrid approach, but it's really called selective. And what this enables us to do is to combine the best of both WebAssembly and server models, and meaning that you can download a very small payload to get started and render your application and be interactive with it. And in the background, we can still download the whole WebAssembly. So by the time it is done, you can just do a refresh, and then your application is running entirely on your browser, and you don't have that kind of possible lag if you are far away from the server. So that's on .NET 8. I haven't had the chance to try that, but it sounds very promising. If us are grateful that that is a feature now. So moving on, what do we have? Just let me drink water for a second. So what are some of the key Blazor components and its architecture? And we will see this in a demo very briefly, and maybe it's easier to understand that way. But in general, we can say that, I mean, you think of any in any .NET project that's divided into layers, like you have repositories and services and so on. And in our UI project or UI layer, we are going to have pages and components, which are both actually just components, but we'll see, which are made with HTML and Razor syntax, which enables us to do data binding, form validation. We have one of the biggest key things of Blazor is that we don't need to use JavaScript, and in fact, we should avoid doing so as much as possible. But if we do have to use JavaScript, then we can. There's a JavaScript interoperability helper. So our pages can be divided into a HTML or Razor syntax front end, and then we can have a code behind where all of our C# code lives. And then we can have also our CSS per component. So we also get dependency injection, and we can do unit tests, for example, with XUnit, and we can do UI unit tests with a library called bunit. And we can do mobs with mobu or whatever you like. So a lot of words, but finally, let's get to our first demo. And I can believe we have already burned through 20 minutes. I'm going to try and speed up a little bit. So coming from the title I gave for this talk, I tried to push the metaphor for cooking recipes and how to prepare stuff with Blazor a little bit, but don't worry, I didn't get too far. I think I stopped before the joke stops being funny, if there was, but mise en place. So everything in place, let's get started setting up a new project. So let me just switch over here to Visual Studio, where I have nothing actually. So let me just close this solution. There we go. Yes, don't save. All right. So I was just preparing this, but it doesn't exist anymore. I just have a README file in there. So let's get started creating a new project. All right. By the way, if you come over here and type Blazor and you don't see anything, then you need to start your Visual Studio installer and just type, look for the Blazor option and install everything. There we go. So over here, you will see that we can create a new Blazor server app, a WebAssembly app, or some empty projects also for server, WebAssembly, libraries, whatever. The empty projects are not really empty, so I'm going to go with the WebAssembly application, which comes with a small Hello World example. I'm going with WebAssembly and not server because the structure is a little bit similar. In general, when you make components and code for WebAssembly or server projects, they work the same. You can move, copy and paste, or move from projects and they will work. But the actual setup of the project is a little bit different and it's a little bit simpler for WebAssembly. So we're going to go with that for now. So go ahead. I'm going to go, let's call this Meaty Blazor. And I need to go one more level up. Okay. There we go. All right. And I'm going to leave it configured for HTTPS. Not going to go into PWAs right now, but maybe the topic of a second talk with this as well. All right. So we have our sample project. We can simply just go ahead and run it. And we can see what the standard, not boilerplate because it has a few things as example, but we can just get started. All right. Yeah, okay. Yes, I'm using Edge. Don't hate, please. And I'm also using light mode. I know. Oh, a developer that doesn't use dark mode. How dare me? Yeah. There's an explanation for this. I pretty much switch it along the day. If the room becomes dark because it's late, I switch to dark mode. But right now there's a lot of light coming in, so I'm using light mode so I don't burn my eyes.
I thought that was illegal for developers, light mode.
No. I grew up like this. I don't know. It's a whole habit. So this is not getting started for some reason. So let's just do a clean. Maybe I had some garbage left over from before I was doing some tests. It's a really fun thing that I want to try and show you the hello world, and that doesn't load. Hey, there we go. Okay, so this page has a really a lot of things going on. So we can see that we have 3 pages we can select from this navigation menu, right? We have the home page, which goes to the base URL, have a counter page, and we have a fetch data page, which simulates how it will go around fetching information from a server, from an API. So I was thinking to spend a while dissecting this, but let's do it shorter because I just want to go straight to the actual demo. But what I do want to show you is, okay, how this pretty much architected. So we can start by the bottom, right? We have our program.cs. This is the entry point for the application. Here we can register services for dependency injection and, well, a couple of other things, but we are not getting to that. We can also say, okay, we are going to start with our app.razor file, which pretty much just handles routing. We're going to leave this as is. We can here notice that this is using main layout component for its layout. And what's a layout? It's just, well, what the main name implies, it's just the template that will be used to render content in whatever URL we navigate to. Again, this is kind of a bit dirty and showing errors. Don't mind any of that. That highlighting shouldn't be going on. I will delete the folder now. I clean it up. So we can see we have an import. It's just for setting up our global inputs for this project. In the share folder, we have a couple of components that come in this example. We are not going to get into them right now. We have this main layout, which is saying, okay, so the basic structure for every page should be a div with a class page, then this sidebar, which is using a nav menu component, and then the main section where we have an about header at the top, and then we are passing this body with an @ sign, which sounds kind of mysterious, into this article element. So what is this @body? This @body is something that's coming from, if you see, our layout is inheriting from this layout component base, which if we inspect it and it opens, there we go, we see that we have what is called a parameter here, all right? And this is all a body. So what this is going to do is whenever the layout is rendering, it will expect to have a render fragment, which is just a piece of HTML, just any element that we can draw. Could be as simple as a string, passed into here. So moving on, we get our pages, out of which we can see that this is the index page. Of course, we don't need to call it index, but speaking about customs and all habits, yeah, the main page is going to be called index. It's using a page title component, which is something that comes just from the base library to display an index title. Then we have a second H1 title, which says hello world, and we are using this survey prompt component, which to see if we can see that we are passing this title that says, okay, how is Blazor working for you? And what is this? What is this string? If we go into the survey prompt component, we can see that it's also receiving over here a parameter, which is called title, and it's just a string, which if we look on top of it, we can see there's a bit of HTML, which the only thing we care about right now is that between these strong tags, we are passing the value that we get from this title parameter. So this usage of @signs all over the place is what's called razor syntax. The first glance, it reminded me a little bit of how we use brackets. What's the brackets? In PHP or where any other framework like this. But don't worry, it's not as bad as PHP. You get used to it really quickly. There's only 1 or 2 quirks that you need to be aware of, because when you start nesting parentheses or you actually want to use an @ sign in your page that's not for Blazor syntax, then you need to escape it a little bit, but it's not really complicated. Okay, moving on. I think I will just leave this example here. Let's forget about it. So I'm just going to close the solution, and off the screen, I am cleaning up. Oh, not so from the screen. I'm processing all the changes in that folder. There we go. So what I'm going to jump to is straight from after adding the project files, I am doing a wipeout. Okay, I am removing everything that doesn't need to be there. Just going to grab that. There we go, from a branch that I already created over there, and it's loading. All right. So let me just open the solution again, and now everything will be clean and more simple. So our app Blazor is the same. The main layout now does not have anything, does not have I've deleted all CSS, I've deleted all of the components that came with the sample. Other than that, there are no changes here. So our layout now is just has a main section, and it expects a body, so nothing else. And our index page merely says, okay, serve this at the root URL and just display a hello world. So we can go ahead and run this. And it should run. Dot. There we go. Hello world. Hey, it's working. All right. So moving on. What are we going to do first? I want to show you how to do a unit test. And this is the point where we say, wait a minute. This was supposed to be a Blazor call, not a TDD talk. Well, I just want to cover a very little bit of test-driven development because, at least for me, when I got started with Blazor, I was a little bit skeptical, saying, okay, how are we going to do unit tests for UI? The only times I had seen that going on were these very rigid unit tests, which pretty much just copy and paste the generated HTML on a page, and they are just checking, okay, so this page should have this exact HTML. And whenever you do a change, you need to do a copy paste, and it doesn't really do anything. It doesn't help you as a tester. So I want to show you how we can actually do some interesting stuff. For this, we need to add a new text project to our solution. Yeah. Okay, new project. It will just be a XUnit text project. We are going to call it Blazor.test, and it's going to be there in also dominantly. So it starts out with blank unit test. But before we try and do anything with this, we are going to install a new package called bunit, which is, there we go. There's a lot of flavors depending on if you want to use just a little bit of it, but we're going to install the whole library, and it's going to ask us to update a bunch of things. And so go ahead and update them. This should already be cached, so it should install pretty quickly. And I think it already has. All right, it has. So one more thing, we need to add project reference to our UI project, because that's what we are going to be testing. All right. So we can get started. Let's say instead of unit test 1, we want to add coverage for our main layout. All right, we are trying to cover everything here, so we're going to add coverage for that. All right, and I'm going to just copy it over so you don't have to wait until I type stuff. All right, so I'm going to paste this test over here. So what are we trying to do, and why do we get a red squiggly? We are trying to render the main layout component so we can see what it has inside. And it is doing an error because we need to inherit from this context, which is a base class from bunit. And this is throwing an error because we don't have a using for it. But let's put it in our global usings. So you are going to be using it all over the place. So using bunit, so we type it. There we go. No. So there we go. And now the error should go away, or it shouldn't. So this is the point where you can start banging your head for a long time and not realize what's going on, because it doesn't make sense. Now, you saw that when we installed bunit, we should say, yeah, just go ahead and update a bunch of stuff. Where within that update, what usually happens is that if you come and see our test project, no, that's not the case. Last time I tried, it had bumped my net framework version to 0.7, and that was incompatible with my other project. There we go. This one is 0.7, and this one is 0.6, so they don't match. So that's the other way around. Put both in 0.7, and now we should be able to rebuild this, and the error should go away. No, it doesn't. And since I don't want to make this into a debugging session, I'm going to just go ahead and grab the version from my repository that I created. Doing that off screen, but this moment, let's throw this all away. Say throw this all away. Yeah, okay. So this is the point where I'm thankful that I spent a while building these samples that I wanted to show, because otherwise this call was not going to happen. All right, so we are already running more time, so I'm going to try this. All right, let's open it again, and I should show you that we can't rebuild and close everything. And now if I go over here and just give it this as ping, we should see our unit tests passing. Which is, okay, it's just one unit test, it passes. What is it doing? So it's just doing a, it is rendering our main layout component, and it's checking that when we don't give any input to it, because let's remember, main layout just expects a body between its main tags, then its output is going to be just main. There's not going to be anything there, so this is right. Next thing we can do is add coverage for our index file. And let's go ahead and going to do that just by pulling the code, because I'm really just burning through time here. All right, now we have two tests in our main layout test. We are checking that when we don't give it a child content, then we're just going to find, okay, I'm not checking for the actual markup to match, but I'm actually just going ahead and looking for the element tag main. All right, that's giving me this component. This works with the same kind of the same kind of find syntax that you use for CSS. So if you want to find something by class, you can just do dot some class, right? And well, like that, and it will work. Or whatever complicated rule CSS path you or X path you want to use in there, you can use this very first type. So we have a second text that when we do give main layout some content, then it will get display. You see, we have this child content that we are passing as parameter to main layout. That's one of the things to watch out for when we are doing unit tests for components. We want to give values to the parameters that need values. So in this case, we are just passing this child content string as its body, and we are just finding that component and ensuring that that child content is being rendered into the inner HTML of that element. I'm going to stop there for now. The index is just similar to this, the index coverage, I mean. So let me breathe for a second. All right, so we have gotten started, and that's the basic setup that we will be using for this demo. Second part of this demo is, and this picture comes with a funny anecdote. You won't believe how hard it is to get DALL-E to draw a person tasting an ad sign. There's a bonus at the end for whoever sticks until the end of this talk. There's a bonus feature there that I will show. So anything. What will we do next? I'm calling this taste-driven development instead of test-driven development. We are trying to, well, the idea here was to walk you through the process of adding a new component by adding your tests first, you know, in a very TDD way. But since we are just 20 minutes off to go, I'm going to burn through this. And I'm just going to skip right to, okay. All right, I'm going to jump right into this version of my branch. All right, let me just rebuild everything and start, at least start by showing you the test first, and then we go into the component. So you can see I have changed the structure a little bit of the folders. I have created a components folder and a layouts folder for the main layout. And we can see here that in our test solution, I created counter tests file, which is doing two things. Just first, it's rendering the counter and then checking that its content is 0 or that it contains 0 because it starts, well, at 0. And then it also checks that, okay, we can get a button element that is within this component and we can click it. And after we click it, we can see that the markup for the component contains a 1. So it got increased from 0 to 1. Now, what does this look like? Let me show you. And you can just trust me that if I run this test, they will all be green. I just really need to speed up. I really thought this was going to be faster, though. I'm guessing we started late. I know. So we're not seeing anything here. We're just seeing the index page, right? So how can we, let's see if I already implemented it at this point, but no. Yes, I put it here. So we can turn any component into a page by simply adding an add page and a URL at the top. So it is very useful for testing your components. You don't need to put them inside of another page and so on. You can just do this. Unless, of course, when they start having parameters, if they have required parameters, then they will just throw an exception because they are not receiving anything. They're receiving null. So we can see that we have an increment button, which I can click and it increases that value. But how is that working actually? So let's go ahead and take a look at the counter component. And we can see this is really simple. We have the add page directive. Then we have an add count, which is displaying this count variable that we have defined in the code section. And then we have a button to which we are saying that, okay, it's on click event. And just like you can use any JavaScript event name, they're all the same, but you need to put the add at the beginning. Otherwise, you are trying to bind to the actual JavaScript. And let me just say that it won't work and you will scratch your head a long time until you realize that you forgot putting that sign there. Then we pass it. There are different syntaxes for this, but I like just to be safe and put double quotes and our method's name with an @ at the beginning. Technically speaking, this @ is not required. It will just figure out that we are referring to this function. I prefer to be explicit because it's reminding me too that, hey, okay, yeah, this is a method that's just defined here. Anyway, so when you click this, this method gets triggered and we increase the count by 1. That's all that this is doing. So we can make this even better. So let's do a small refactor. Again, my plan was just to type this in front of you, but let me just bring it from the repo. Okay, I'm refreshing. Yep. All right. And now our code has gone away. What has happened to the code? Where is this button click handler function? And if we go over here to our counter, we can see that there's this little triangle, and we can open it up. And now we can see that below here, I created a counter.razor.cs, which contains the code behind for this page. And whenever you create a new file, it will start out like this, like public class counter, right? And this will give you an error, which is that the counter name is already being used by a class, because the counter.razor is the component is creating a class already, just free of charge. So what we need to do is tell this is a partial class. So we are adding stuff to it, right? We are split it into different files. So the logic is still the same, but we have also added a counter.razor.css file, right? And there we have a bit of CSS. We can also see that I felt creative, and instead of using a button, I'm just using a div. Why? Because I don't know, the internal designer in me wanted to be that way. So we can also take a look at the counter tests and say that our tests haven't changed. The only thing that's changed is that instead of just fetching a button, I placed a CSS class on it that's called counter button. So I'm just fetching it by CSS class. That's pretty much the same. I can also run it. And just to show you, you can also continue to believe that all the tests are passing. I am very glad I had a coffee for this, because I really need to. All right, so in the index, we still have nothing, but we can go ahead and see our counter page, which has this lovely square, which we can click and it increases, and that's it. All right. What can we keep going? We can add something more, which is, let's say that we wanted to use this counter component somewhere, and we're not just going to put a single counter component in our index page. Let's say we want a list counters. All right. So what we are going to look at now, there are also unit tests for the counter list. I left them as an exercise to you to look them up. Okay, so counter hasn't changed, but we now have this counter list component, which we are using in our index page since we have it. And look at this, since counter list, I need to rebuild so it doesn't complain. Since counter list doesn't expect any parameters or rather anything between its opening and closing tags, we can just use this syntax, but this is just the same as doing this, right? Doesn't matter. So what does counter list look like? Counter list is simply, it has a button, a plus button, which when we click triggers this on add button clicked handler. And you can see I forgot to put the add sign here, and it doesn't matter because Blazor is already figuring out that I'm trying to call this. What we have is simply a count of counters, which starts at 0. So if you look at the unit test, what it does is first check that when we start, there are no counters. And every time we click on the plus sign, then we get a new counter, which we can increase its value when we click on it, and we can add more of them, and each of them has its own value. And that's very fine and well. But what else? What if I want to, what's this? Yeah, what if let's say we want to calculate the count. I mean, the sum, the total for all of these counters. How will we go about that? This example worked a lot better, would work a lot better if I was typing it in front of you, but I'm just going to skip straight to how it looks when it's built. And what we need to do is something a little bit complicated, because the counter list component doesn't know what's inside each of those counters. So what we need to do is pass, and actually, how long can we stretch after 4 o'clock? I know we started a couple of minutes late, but I don't know how much time we have, because this is one of the points that it doesn't really make a lot of sense unless I show it. Okay.
I think I think you can stretch a few minutes. Yeah, it's not.
I think we can stretch. Yeah. All right. Well, let me just roll back to the previous version. Anyway, what we are changing now is that in our counter component, you know, we used to have, and I can just show you a div. Maybe just do this. And yeah, that will at least let me show you. Right. So what did we change? What I did here is that instead of just having a private count that starts at 0, I turn it into a public property, which is which I put this parameter attribute. So what this does is simply say, okay, parent components using this can pass this count value, and we can just use it over here. Now, when we click the button, we can increase this count, but that will just increase the count within the component. So the list will still not know what's the actual value that each component has. The way to go around that is to add an event callback, which we need to follow the naming convention of just calling it the name of the property and then change. Okay, so what we do with that is that whenever we increase the count, we can trigger this event callback and give it the new value, and it will notify the parent. Now, you may be tempted to say, hey, wait, but if I want to notify the parent every time this value changes, I could just put it on the setter of the property. And that's not a good idea, because then that puts you in a situation where you need to figure out if this setter is being triggered because the parent is telling you that the value changed, or because you clicked on a button and that's causing the value to change. So that can get you into a very nice loop where you update the value by clicking a button, and you tell the parent about the new value, and the parent tells you about the value, and you get stuck on a loop. And you can try and go around that by, I don't know, checking, okay, only do the invoke async if the value is different, or you can try and use one of Blazor's lifecycle components, lifecycle methods, like the onParameter set lifecycle component, lifecycle method. But really, that's just getting into a whole lot of issues that you can avoid simply by keeping in mind that you need to only notify the parent when you want to, because I don't know, maybe you want to change this value and not have the parent notified for some reason, and that's completely valid. So keep in mind that whenever you want to notify the parent, you can do so here. I could have also not done a count plus plus here and just have a temporary value placed somewhere. Let's say a new variable called count, inner count, and just do the sum there and pass that value. And whenever this goes around from the parent, this count will get overwritten. But it's just easier to go this way. Whew, anyway. And what about our counter list? Well, I'm just keeping everything in a single file for now. I didn't split it into a go behind. By the way, something cool that still sticks around for the Windows Forms days is that when you are looking into a file that's been split into two, you can just click and say go to page, or you can click and say go to code, and it will take you back and forth. So you don't have to go through a lot of open tabs if you, like me, tend to have too many open tabs. But let's go to counter list. Anyway, so what we're doing here, let's focus on the code first, right? So we have a total, we have a list of counters, right? It's not just one integer now, but we have a list of integers which each have the value for each of the counters that we are displaying on the page. Total is merely being calculated as the sum of that list. So when we click the add button, we are adding a 0 to the list, right? And we will let this for later. Let's go and look at the Blazor syntax or HTML. So we should have a main div. Then we have our add button, which just adds a new counter. Then we are doing a for loop. You may be tempted to do a for each, but that won't go right now. Let's just do a for with an index. And in here, we are making a copy of that index because, long story short, you don't want to pass the iterator from a for into a component as parameter. That will leave you into weird situations. So we are creating a list item element to which we are passing a counter, to which we are saying, okay, the count for this is going to be the number that's in the position index of this list of integers. And you can have a count change and handler to which we are going to pass. I mean, count change, let's remember, in the counter.Blazor, it's an integer callback to which we are passing the new value that this counter has. So what we need to do in our list is say, okay, we are going to map this, and we could improve the formatting on this a little bit, but I think it's understandable. Okay, so we are creating a lambda function to which we are passing. And why is it we have, I need you to notice this parenthesis, right? If we try to do this, then we are just saying, okay, this new count is supposed to be something on C#. That is why it has an @ sign at the beginning, and then the rest, I don't know what. So we are just putting everything between parentheses. And everything, when you put an @ sign and parentheses, then everything that's with, inside of parentheses is going to be C# code. So there we are getting a lambda function to which we are passing the new value from the count change. And we are also passing the index copy from here. So now, finally, we have this uncounters count change handler. You can take a guess whether I like tongue twisters or not, to which we are passing this index and say, okay, just update the value on that position. And finally, we can see that here we have our total being displayed. And we can go and run it. And now, whenever we start with a total of 0, and we can add a new one here, and nothing happens when I increase this one. and this one, and this one, and this one. And they should keep on increasing. So that is working. All right. Now, I got a couple more demos lined up. At least one more, I think we can do, which is how to handle share state. All right, so I was calling this state-driven development, and I was going to call this sorting. Anyway, we already did a little bit of this parameters and data binding. I won't be able to show you two-way data binding right now, but it's really simple. I can couple up an example, and then I want to go straight to how we can go about sharing the state between different parts of the project. So let me just go ahead and pull the share state demo because it actually takes a while to set up. We can go like this, and I can rebuild it so the errors go away, right? All right. So you can see I cleaned up a little bit again. I have, can I move this? All right. Sorry, I had the Zoom window in the middle. So I've gone ahead and split it out counter list into CSS and front-end files. And maybe I can go ahead and show you, yeah, let's just go and do a comparison, right? What's different? New history. I'm going to just do it like this and compare commits. So this will show me all of the changes that I should brought in. All right, let me just close all of this. Why doesn't it have a close all? Oh, because that's on the well, dang it. Compare commits, I say. All right, let's just go from here. So what have, in order to, let's say, what am I trying to accomplish? Let's start with that. So right now we had, up until now, we had an index page. Within the index page, we have a counter list, and that counter list has many counters inside. So for now, it's really easy. I mean, if we want to share values, there's not a lot of nesting going on. But let's suppose our application was something really large, or even just in this example that we want the total to actually be displayed on the index page. So we could go about that by giving the counter list an event handler or a callback that shoots back into the index page what's the total whenever it gets updated. But I want to take this chance to say, okay, let's suppose this was actually a larger project and the total needed to be notified into several components which are far away. And so doing a prop drilling and sending it all over the place will be really cumbersome. So for something like that, we can have let's forget about the test project, but this is covered by unit testing. Well, kind of, never mind. Let's forget about the test project for now, and let's just go into, let's notice that I added a services folder, and in there I created a share state service, right? And we can just look at that here because it's all a brand new file. What is this share state service? Okay, so this is going to be a singleton, basically, where we can put values, and we can use what's called RX, or rather subscribers and observers, which has a little bit of complexity to set up. So you don't really need to do this unless you're finding into a situation where, okay, this is less complexity than trying to pass the values by callbacks, basically. Yeah, if it's just a couple of calls, then never mind about this, but it tends to to simplify some stuff. So anyway, we create our share state service class, and we need a couple of properties for this work. So we want to keep track of the total, which is an integer, right? So we create a new total subject. We also need to declare a total observable, which is also of type int. And then what we do is in the constructor for this shared state service, we're going to say that the total observable is just the total subject as observable. So what this is going to do is keep track of the actual value for this in the total subject, but other components or classes or whatever can subscribe to the total observable, and they will be notified when this value changes. Finally, we get this public function, which is for, oh, by the way, we are keeping the subject as private, so we are not exposing it. And we are just exposing this total update, not the best name, we could call it something else. But the idea is that this method, we just receive a new value when we do update the total and just push it into the subject, which will then trigger notifications to all of the subscribers of the observables. So something else we need to set up is we need to put this on program.cs. All right, we need to register, and this should slide. Well, we need to register our singleton. Right, we could go about it some other way, but let's just keep it simple with a singleton. And imports don't really, no, we don't need anything else. What we do need to keep in mind is that this, even though this is called these observables and subjects and so on are all defined in a system.reactive library. But keep in mind that even though it starts with system, this is not included by default. You need to install a NuGet package, which is what's called system.reactive. And then you will be able to actually use this code. So that's what we are doing over here. We are adding that package. Then we need to do two things. We need to subscribe to these changes, and we need to push these changes. So let's begin with the counter list. So in the counter list, I have, well, I should split this into code behind and a front end file. And as you can see that I removed the total from here because we're going to show it on the index now. So the counter list is just, let me just show it over here. So the counter list now has a shared state service, which we can resolve the dependency injection through this inject attribute. Okay, we don't need to do constructor-based dependency injection. We can just put this, just like we will receive a parameter. We can just say, no, this comes from DI. If we wanted to keep everything, or we wanted to inject something into a front-end file, let's say that I needed to use this shared state service in my counter, right, instead of the counter list. We should show it real quick. We can just do that by adding an add inject, all right, and then the service and shared state. Of course, this also needs a using. We can just call like this, and it looks like that. So we have using services, inject, the shared state service. That will be all that's needed. But back to the counter list. Right, back to the counter list. So we are injecting the shared state service, and we are just when we handle the the onClick event that usually just increased the value by 1 and triggered the callback to notify the parent. What we're doing now instead is not notifying the parent, but saying, okay, on share state, let's update the total with the new sum. All right, and no. I messed up and mentioned the event handler from the counter there. So sorry, this didn't used to do anything else fancy right now before this. Anyway, we are just notifying on share state that the total has been updated to this new sum of the list of counts. And how do we respond to these changes? We can take a look at the index now, which I have also split into a code behind and front-end files. And we can see this is a little bit complicated. So this is why I say, okay, if you can, yes, Gonzalo, you can unmute yourself and go ahead. I see you have your hand raised. If you're speaking, we cannot hear you. I'm going to assume you raised your hand by mistake. Yeah.
No. Can you listen now?
Yeah.
I want to ask you, why are you adding a 0?
Why am I adding
a 0 in the other class?
In which one?
In the one you was showing before, this one.
No. Counter. This one?
No. It was a C# class.
All right. So before I was just showing, I think I was at counter list.
In the counter, yes, there, line 15.
Line 15. Well, this is the handler that comes from the original plus button. When we click the plus button, we are adding a 0 to the list, and that's like a new counter.
Okay, and showing
that hasn't
0.
changed. Yeah.
Okay, just that.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. So we are notifying the share state that the total has changed, and we are reacting to that in the index page. There we go. So let's go back to the index, but this time we're going to see this. We see that in the Blazor file, I have added the add total here, because we now have a private total amount. But actually getting this value is a little bit complicated. So we first inject the share state service. All right. We then need a place to store our subscription, which is an ID disposable, which is going to bring us to having to implement ID disposable for this whole class. Then on the uninitialize method, uninitialize is just one of the many lifecycle methods that I mentioned on Blazor components. You have uninitialize, on parameter set, on after render. They all have different purposes. There are a lot of times when you have to use some of those. I'm not going to get into that now. There's a link at the bottom of this presentation that will take you to more information about it. So anyway, in the uninitialize method, we are creating a new subscription to the total observable from ShareState service. We are doing that the same way, ShareState.totalObservable.subscribe, and that's going to notify us of new total values. What are we going to do with that new total value? We're just simply going to assign it to our total private variable. So that's what we member, which is what we're using for displaying it on the page. And after that, we have a state has changed. Now, without this state has changed call, the actual value on this member is going to get updated, but the UI will never be redrawn. So there's usually, when you are dealing with properties and event handlers, the difference is picked up automatically and the screen gets redrawn. But there are times where this doesn't happen, and it's a little bit on purpose because otherwise it could result in a lot of re-renders on the page. So we need to look out for these situations, and just remember, if you are very, very sure that you are updating a value correctly, but you don't see it reflected on the page, you may be busy. State has changed code. I'm not going to get more technical than that. So afterwards, like I said, we need to implement the structure for this class and this pose method in which we dispose of this subscription, and also suppress the garbage collector. And if you're asking me, hey, is this all really necessary? Kind of. I mean, you can go by without doing this. You are maybe setting yourself up for memory overflow sometime in the future, and you will surely get, if your project runs any kind of static code analysis tool for quality checks, it will surely complain that you haven't done this. So you can just go ahead and do it always. And I can just finally run and see and show you how this is working. And with that, we can call this a wrap. If it works, there we go. We can add new counters, and when we click on them, the total updates. But it's not just a simple update, right? Now you know that this is actually firing an event and updating stuff in the background with observables. So I have already been talking nonstop for an hour, and we were like here, and I had a couple of things that I wanted to show, but they are going to require way more time than I have ever anticipated, which are form validation, which is something that should be simple, but it can actually get tricky. I mean, once it's working, then yeah, it's fine. Of course, this works, but get it to work can be a bit of a pain. Fortunately, there are a lot of resources online if you want to look this up. Otherwise, we can set up a follow-up call. And I was also going to talk about JavaScript interoperability, or JS interop for short, because it's another thing that, hey, usually you don't need to deal with JavaScript, but once in a while, you need to interact with some piece of the page that can only, or achieve some behavior that can only be done by actually writing JavaScript. And this is really useful to know. An usual case for this is if you are consuming components made by some third party. Let's say you are using, I don't know, Telerik or whatever, and you will realize that their components have a lot of functionality by default, and sometimes overriding that functionality will require you to get dirty. Well, get your hands dirty. Don't mean you need to. Anyway, that's pretty much it for now. If you want to take a look at the code examples that I showed right now, you can go ahead and check out this repository. It is divided into the several demos that I was showing, but you will see that the branches for authorization, well, not authorization, form validation and JS interop are missing for now. I will probably add them in the near future. But still, if you want to take a look at everything we covered so far and everything that I had to go through faster than I thought of, it's breaking down into several commits, so you should be able to follow it along. These are further resources in case that you want to continue exploring. We will copy paste this somewhere that you can access it, or I will share this slide. Hello everyone, I hope it was entertaining use of 1 hour and a half.